Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to get an opportunity to hear a great author, Ted Jackson. So Ted Jackson is a photojournalist, writer, and author of You Ought to Do a Story About Me, an unlikely tale of his 30-year friendship with Jackie Wallace, a homeless crack addict who in 1990 randomly boasted about playing in 3 Super Bowls. The book received an Amazon editor's pick for best biographies and memoirs. Ted got his journalistic start at the Daily Iberian. We welcome him home. Yay! In 1982, and then signed on with the New Orleans Times-Picayune, where in 1997 he was part of a 4-member team that won a Pulitzer Prize for public service for The Oceans of Trouble, a comprehensive look at the impending collapse of the world's fisheries. In 2005, he photographed Hurricane Katrina, for which the Times-Picayune staff won a Pulitzer for public service. His work has appeared in publications around the world, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the National Geographic. He has appeared on CBS, ABC, CNN, Fox News, NBC, and NPR. And currently he lives in Covington with his wife, Nancy, who's in the back. So, hi, Nancy. You're not Ted's wife right now, you're Nancy's. So if we could give Ted a wonderful, warm, New Iberia welcome.
I told him he could introduce me any way he wanted to, and I got nervous. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Nancy and I drove in this morning and took a look around at our old neighborhood where we used to live, the Daily Iberian, which is no longer on that corner. But the statue of what we at the time called the donut did survive the move. First of all, thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity for me to come back, to share my stories. I never really know who my audience is when I step up like this. But I like for you to know, I don't know where what your backgrounds are. But I like to kind of share what, as I like to introduce, where God has had me journey through this life. And it has touched my work so much that I always have to introduce myself that way. I want to mention when I was a kid, a lot of the church sermons started with the parable of the talents. And my mom always told me as a child, Ted, you're so talented. You can draw, you can paint, you're so talented. And then the preacher the next day said, and if you don't use your talents, it will be taken away from you. And believe it or not, as a young toddler, I took that to heart. And I felt like whatever talents I ever had, that I need to use them and have a benefit to humanity and to God. So that kind of got me started, but I wanted to introduce also when Nancy and I first had the opportunity to move here, it was for my first newspaper job. I turned my art skills into photography, which gave me the ability to tell stories, which I realized was my real love, I guess, whatever it took to tell a story. And so when I first got here, we came here from Macomb, Mississippi, by way of Hattiesburg, where I went to school. And when I first got the job offered to me, Nancy and I said, you know, it's only 3 hours away from Macomb, Mississippi. How different can it be? And so when we got here, we were introduced to incredible food, incredible people. I was so proud of myself when I learned how to spell Babineau and Babineau for the first time. But we lived across the bayou, and I was driving across to work one day, and I was following an old, ratty, old pickup truck. And I noticed the bumper stickers on the back. It was covered in bumper stickers. And I know this guy. I noticed his bumper stickers on the back, and being from Mississippi, it really caught my eye. And one of the bumper stickers said, believe it or not, since I was an Archie Manning fan, Ole Miss was in my blood, The bumper sticker said, "Go to hell, Ole Miss." And the one right next to it said, "God said it, I believe it, and that settles it." So I shot a picture while I'm stopped at the stoplight, and believe it or not, the Daily Iberian ran that on the section front. But I like to share this story with people too, is that when one of the first big assignments I had with the Times-Picayune was to do a story about the cities at the opposite ends of the Mississippi River. And it was my first chance to travel for the paper. And so I went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I'm up there trying to get my bearings. I'm still young, I'm very green, but I'm stopping at a gas station to buy a map. And it's before GPS, right? Before Google Maps. And I stop into the gas station and I tell the girl behind the counter what I want. And she looks at me and smiles and says, "You're not from here, are you?" And I said, "No, where do you think I'm from? I'm going to play a game here." And she said, "You're from down south," by my accent, right? And I said, "That's too easy. Where down south do you think I'm from?" And she thought for a second, and she said, "Iowa." Well, I got a little bit of that when I came here too. You're not from here. So I learned a lot of things when I came to New Iberia. And one thing, like the bumper sticker said, I had a lot to learn about cultures, attitudes. A recent bumper sticker I saw, and you may have seen this somewhere, says, "Don't believe everything you think." Right? Boy, did I learn that here. That I learned what the culture was like. And boy, did I learn that when I got to New Orleans. That everything you think about the world may not be right. And as a journalist, I found that liberating. Instead of going out and finding stories, specifically photographs of what I thought the world was about, I wanted to learn about the world. I wanted to see what people had to say. So at this point, I want to show you just a quick portfolio of my work over the years, and that will lead into the story that I want to talk about, okay? take Katrina out, okay? Sometimes I show the Katrina pictures next, and sometimes it's just too much to handle sometimes. So for the sake of time, I just want to screen through a few of these photos. Somewhere in the mid-'80s, I had a simple homeless assignment about some guys that were living under a bridge. And I got to know a little bit about them and what motivated them to be there, what they did with the money that was given to them on the side of the road, how they would not accept food from me, but ate out of the dumpsters instead, and then headed to the grocery store for the liquor. So it was, there was a lot of different things going on with that story that kind of opened my eyes just a little bit about what homelessness is all about. And this was a photo that I shot in the late 80s of a crack drug deal going down. And I hate to say this in front of my wife, but she knows the story too well by now, that I hid in my trunk and shot through the tail light that I'd taken the lens out of to get this picture. And I like to say that my editors really didn't care how I got the picture, as long as it was ethical, it was truthful, and it was in focus, in that order. But sometimes I found myself pushing myself way too far to get the pictures to tell the story that I was trying to get. Went to Saudi Arabia for the Gulf War, Desert Storm. And of course, a real highlight was to be on the field at the Saints Super Bowl win. But there was one story that was given to me as an assignment that my editor told me that gave me the option to go to one of the nation's worst housing projects and document what it was like to live there. And I spent 6 weeks in the Desire Housing Project. And I think this was one of the biggest educations that I had about social issues, social problems, what I thought could be done to help people in these situations, and how wrong I was about those things. And trying to imagine what it would be like to raise my children in this environment. So this was a little boy named Mikey Stewart who was killed in it was the first time I and my editors and my coworkers had ever heard the term drive-by shooting. And I forget which year it was, but he was killed in a drive-by shooting, and the family made a special statement with this by having his tiny body in a horse-drawn carriage with glass sides, paraded through the main part of the city to bring attention to the politicians. This has got to stop. Of course, it was just the beginning, but the children all carried signs, "Thou shalt not kill." But 30-something years ago, in 1990, so I guess that makes it 33 years ago now, which is pretty amazing to think about, on July 3rd, 1990, my editor, Kurt Munchler, called me into the office and said, "You're not doing much today." I was in the darkroom printing up some pictures. He said, "I noticed a homeless camp under the Carrollton overpass. It has a neat little setup. It looks like a living room with couches and tables and things. Why don't you go down and just check it out, see what it looks like?" And so had the images in my head of what that possibly could turn into, what kind of story it would be, learn more about who these guys are and what it's like to live in a camp where really nobody cares about you anymore. And so I went down there. Instead of a camp, which had been turned upside down and destroyed, this is what I stumbled upon. And I thought it was an interesting picture. Not that I would do anything with it, because it was not the story that my editor was looking for. It was just this one guy. But I really noticed how neat his camp was. He had his shoes side by side. He's got his socks tucked in. He's got his clothes folded, his water jug, and the newspaper, that day's newspaper, folded out. and it had the Times-Picayune sports section. And so I shot the picture, and then I woke him up and asked him about the other camp. He woke up, kind of wiped the sleep out of his eyes, and he said, why do you want to know? And I told him, I'm a journalist. I was looking for a story, and that's when he said, you ought to do a story about me. I hear that a lot. And I kind of chuckled inside, But I said, and why would I want to do that? And he said, because I've played in 3 Super Bowls. Well, I didn't believe it. You wouldn't have believed it. I just kind of said, okay, what's your name? And he told me, Jackie Wallace. Didn't mean anything to me. I did not grow up in New Orleans. I didn't know the legend, Jackie Wallace. I didn't know the superstar at St. Aug High School who went to Arizona, became an All-American punt returner and defensive back. I didn't know the Jackie Wallace that was drafted in the 2nd round by the Minnesota Vikings and played in his first Super Bowl in New Orleans. Returned home as a hometown hero. And I didn't know the Jackie Wallace that was then played with Burt Jones and the great, great team in the Baltimore Colts in 75 to 76. And then went to the Rams where he set the all-time NFL punt return record. I didn't know these guys. It was Jackie in Arizona. It's 3 teams. This is the play where he set the NFL record that still stands today. And this is where I found him. So I spent a couple days with him, actually tagging him around, washing his clothes, staying out late at night with him. He pretended to apply for jobs. That's the way I could see it. And then it published on Friday of that week. And it was the front page story. Even with the big world news that was going on at the time, Jackie's story led the page. Well, it created incredible sensation. And remember, it was 1990. The NFL had no programs to help former players out on their own, either financially or with abuse, drug abuse, or anything like that. That changed within a couple months after this story published. 3 years later, that day, I kind of patted myself on the back and said, that was a good job. You did a good job, Ted. And I collected a few copies of the paper and stuck them under my desk and went on with my day. But 3 years later, I had a knock on the window that was right over my desk that led from the photo department to the newsroom. And I looked up while typing some captions. I looked up, and there, standing 6'2", with his arms spread out like this in a 3-piece suit, was Jackie Wallace. He had gone through rehab. His team, which I knew about, his team from St. Aug had scooped him up from under the bridge, taken him to Baltimore to a clinic. He had gotten sober, gone through the program for 3 years, was doing great, and now he had charmed his way into the newsroom to invite me and the writer who had wrote the story that day, invite us to his wedding. That he and Deborah had bought a house, and they were getting married, and they were moving in, and it was just, they wanted us there. And when I looked up, that was what he said, do you believe in miracles? So my wife will attest to this. She says I'm a pack rat. I guess it's true because I still have the invitation that he gave me that day. This is Jackie and Deborah in Baltimore. This is the cool part of the story, I think, is when Thanksgiving morning came around after this, our phone rang. And Thanksgiving morning, I picked it up and expected to hear my brother calling from Mississippi saying, are you going to be on time today? You're bringing appetizers. So instead, when I picked up the phone, it was Jackie Wallace. And he was calling me to thank me for those photos and to thank me for what I meant to his life, which was something I had never had quite like that before. And that really touched me. And he continued to tell me that things like this is what Thanksgiving means to him. He said, my family, he said, a lot of people think that I grew up poor, although I did live in a housing project for a while, we had a wonderful family. We got a great education. My siblings are very successful. I played professional football. He said, but we believe in Thanksgiving, and we believe in giving thanks. He said, we always had a toast. Even as children, we got the little juice glasses with a little grape juice in it, and we all toasted it every Thanksgiving. And the toast was, to the waist, to the taste. And we all remember that as children. I said, Jackie, what does that mean? And he said, I don't know. I honestly think it's supposed to mean from the taste to the waist. When you eat it, your waist gets bigger. I don't know, but it was always so charming the way Jackie told it. Jackie is so charming as a human being. So anyway, that happened every year after that. And to cut to the chase, I'll tell you that one year that phone call didn't come. Jackie had been clean and sober in Baltimore for 12 years. And when I didn't get the phone call, I worried. But things change, people move on, people rearrange their calendars. But the next year, we checked in on him. And it was exactly what you would think, that he had taken that one step that took him right back to the bridge. And sure enough, he was now sleeping under bridges again, and nobody knew where he was. For 12 years, it seems like Jackie's life goes in series of 12s. But for 12 years, I looked under bridges, and I knocked on some doors, and every time I went to a homeless shelter, I would ask, does anybody know who Jackie Wallace is? Have you seen him? Have you heard from him? And a few times people would say, yeah, I remember him, but I haven't seen him in a long time. And then finally someone said, I think he's in jail. Well, fast forward, after 12 years, I had an assignment idea. A writer and I, not incognito, but we went into a homeless shelter intentionally to go into the situation as if we were homeless. Not incognito, not pretending, but just wanted to experience the whole thing. I still had my cameras on. I still had a credential around my neck, but I had to go through the embarrassing intake of hours of questions. I had to subject myself to a TB test, all these things. And we would sleep in the bunks that night and eat the food. I intentionally went very hungry so that I wouldn't be tempted to skip dinner. So here we were in this shelter it's called the New Orleans Mission. It's right downtown. And I'm working on the story, talking to the guys, learning their stories, and asking the question, do y'all know Jackie Wallace? You ever heard of him? And over, people didn't even know his name anymore. So that night when I laid down on my bunk and I listened to the sounds of the room, and I kind of had a moment, where I said, okay, you've pretended to be looking for Jackie for all these years. I think it's time to get serious. What happened to him? Where did he end up? Is he dead? Which was my first check mark. I just assumed. Next, probably in prison. Check mark. Well, So I got serious about it. And I don't think I'll take the time to read the whole thing. I wanted to read this one little section here. Let's see. Page 148 of the book. Jackie Wallace hung in my gut like a dull ache. His disappearance bugged me much more deeply than it should have. Photojournalists are supposed to use the camera to create an emotional barrier to grief and tragedy. We're supposed to maintain professional distance, to become mere observers, but not this time. I just couldn't understand why I cared so deeply. Drug addicts relapse all the time. Sweet stories turn sour on a regular basis. Pedestals crumble, heroes disappoint. We all stand on feet of clay. What is the whole purpose of man? Am I my brother's keeper? These scriptures were meant to be more than motivational quips or psychological exercises. So I wanted to feel more, to dig deeper. I didn't want dainty Sunday school answers for my problems. I could already see how God had used experiences to shape my faith, the doors that had already been opened before me, and all the people that I had met. And like many Christians I knew, I yearned to communicate more directly with God, to sense His guidance more clearly through prayer. But despite my desire for clarity, I know Christians are called to live by faith. The crossroads in my past represented critical choices and circumstances that had led me to profound discoveries and opportunities, just like my decision to move to New Orleans in the first place. And meeting Jackie Wallace represented an important crossroad. I could see how it changed me. A life of faith is meant to be left intentionally murky. So, with that in mind, I talked to my editors who decided to cut me loose, to search full-time for this man and to see what happened. And it took months. I'm really terrible with dates and timelines as to how long this took. I ended up doing an Excel document to keep track of the months and days of all of my life intersecting with Jackie's. But I failed to look this up. But I'm thinking it was about 8 months before I found this little note in a Lexis search that had the right name. It just seemed to be the wrong place. But I went to this place called Gateway. And it was an apartment complex on the west bank of the river. And I walked up to this man sitting in the front of this apartment. And I said, looking for a friend. And he said, oh yeah, who is that? And I said, and I knew that if I just said, I'm looking for this man named Jackie Wallace, I would look like a cop. And so I said, when I say the name, watch his eye. And if his eye twitches, he'll know him. And so I said, his name is Jackie Wallace. And he twitched. And he looked at me, he looked me up and down, and he said, it's the door on the right. And just when I looked up, started to the door opened. And a big man stuck his head out. And he yelled out, he said, what are you telling that man about me? And I said, are you Jackie Wallace? And he said, he wants to know. And I said, when I tell you, you're going to smile. I introduced myself. I'm Ted Jackson. And holy cow, what a moment. He engulfed me with a bear hug. I'm not 6'2", 210 pounds. He engulfed me. His grin was so huge, he was in a halfway house. And he had been sober and clean for 3 years. and he was making his entrance back into the world again. So there we are. He brought me in, showed me his bedroom, showed me his house, introduced me to his roommate, all his mementos that he still had. He didn't have many, but this was a high school picture that was in the Times-Picayune that he had saved. It was marked his place in his daily devotionals. Still had a picture from the Minnesota Vikings team, his teammates. And when we finally finished talking that day, he said, "My hips are hurting really bad." I call them his NFL hips now. I said, "When they get to hurting, I need to take a break." And so he laid down. I said, "I'll let myself out." But when I saw this moment, I couldn't help relating this picture with that picture. What a moment, huh? So, I'm going to bounce a little bit. Let's see where we want to go here. I want to be very respectful of your time here. There's so many things I want to say and talk about. But the story ran in the newspaper first, before it was a book, because I thought I knew everything at this point. But I was only scratching the surface. But I also tweeted about this story. And I have never seen tweets retweet and comments and likes and shares like this. This was the feed as it updated every second. So much that I had to take a video of it. It did this for over 3 days without stopping. It just went on and on. And I wrote these notes down to get this one right. Within a matter of days, the story about Jackie Wallace being found had reached 1.47 million unique visitors to our website, had 8.3 million page views, more than the news site had ever seen. The original tweet was retweeted 131,000 times and liked 279,000 times and generated 4,600 comments, which I had to answer. This was a very emotional thing for me to do this and deal with this. It was a remarkable thing. People started sending me pictures and stories. They started telling me about how that story had changed their opinion about their loved one, about their father who was an addict, about their child who was an addict. As soon as the book came out, like I said, I thought I knew the whole story, but once the story was in the paper and I contacted an agent who was thrilled to work with me on this, and then we sold the story to HarperCollins. And I always like to remind anybody with everybody has the question, so I like to go ahead and say Jackie gets half of everything that the book brings in. But HarperCollins was thrilled to do it, and the response has been absolutely amazing. The interviews we got to do together. This has to be my favorite. When I first started the book, my biggest dream was to have Jackie sitting or standing next to me in a moment like this. And it never quite worked out that way because of his NFL hips. But to see him to be on the air with Al Roker on the Today Show was absolutely amazing. They did a wonderful piece. You can find that on Google. It's fun to watch Jackie and Al talk. And the Today Show called me back in the end of December, right after Christmas, and said they loved the piece so much they were going to run it again as their end of the year story. So they actually ran this story twice. I don't have time to talk about all this stuff, but there are so many things that this story teaches me. One thing that it teaches me that I have to share is that I asked the question to a chaplain when I was interviewing for the book. I said, tell me, what does addiction feel like? And how hard is it to get out of addiction? I said, because I've never been addicted to anything. I don't know, and now I've got to write about it. And he said, you've never been addicted to anything? And I said, no. And he said, oh, really? He said, check your closets. Everybody is addicted to something. It may be chocolate. It may be Cokes. It may be a sexual addiction. It may be alcohol. It may be something that you love so much it's more than life itself. He said, tell me what it is. Tell me what it is. And I said, it would have to be the love of my grandchildren. There you go. He said, now imagine Jackie Wallace, his brain works the same way as your brain works when you think of your grandchildren. And think of him living sober for 12 years without it. That's addiction. When I look at this list, I think of Jackie. These are Jackie's. Grieving a death is what led him to use crack for the first time when he was 33 years old. He had already been out of football for 3 years. So to see him signing copies of the book, to know that we all have one that we can talk to, we can deal with, we can relate to. When Jackie's around his team, Jackie's in a new world. He's around his friends. This is when he graduated from his rehab. That's my wife Nancy with Jackie. And that's his 72nd birthday, just a few days ago. And that's my granddaughter delivering a Christmas tree to him with all of his teammates as ornaments on the tree. I'm going to skip this. Wish we had time for it, but I want to end with the simple encouragement that having the opportunity to see a door open in front of me that was clear that God was opening it for me, and then having the courage to walk through it and to walk those crazy roads with Jackie for all these years has been an amazing experience. And as they say, the guy walking down the beach, picking up starfish and throwing them back in the ocean, the guy says, you can't possibly save all these starfish. Look at them. He said, you can't make a difference in this life like that. And the guy picks up another starfish and he throws it back in the ocean. He says, I made a difference to that one. And that's the way I feel about Jackie. We can't save all the addicts. We can't deal with all those problems. There's so many things to deal with that. But we can all look out for one. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.